teacher, a mentor, spreading hope so you see there's more to your life than who you thought you could be. Feel that ocean breeze, feel your spirit rise. Open up your heart now, it's time to realize you're more than your body, more than your mind. Set aside the doubt that's been keeping you confined. The gateway is open, so let your soul unwind. Step into your purpose, leave your fears behind. You're more than your body, more than your mind. Set aside the doubt that's been keeping you confined. The gateway is open, so let your soul unwind. Step into your purpose, leave your fears behind. It's the Rick Patterson Show. Faith and insight, watch it flow. Tune into wisdom, watch your spirit glow. You're more than your limits, let your heart overflow. From the heart of
Okay, let's get started today. I'm glad you're with me. This is Rick Patterson, your pastor, your teacher, your mentor, your host today of a wonderful, wonderful teaching that's going to just transform everything you understand and believe about Matthew chapter 24. I'm glad you're with me. Share this link right now and share this topic right now. Now, for those of you who see the free book offer, email me, rick@patterson.org, rick@patterson.org. I'm going to send you free of charge a book entitled The Days of Vengeance. It is an exposition of the book of Revelation. The Days of Vengeance, exposition of the book of Revelation. This is a massive book, highly footnoted and documented. It's 721 pages. 721 pages. I'm going to send it to you free of charge. You need to sign up, send me an email, rick@patterson.org, and say, send me The Days of Vengeance by David Chilton. 721 pages. It will be talking about all of the symbolism, all of the worship, all the imminent events that were taking place during that time period when John wrote the book of Revelation. You don't want to miss this free offer. It's free, doesn't cost you a penny. All it costs you is sending me an email. And if you would, I would more than happy to send it to your friends and family, or you can forward it over to them. And we're going to send that out to you. Send me your name, send me your address, send me your email, and so we can get this out to you immediately. Free, no charge whatsoever. This is my gift to you as you begin to learn the real truth about the book of Matthew and the book of Revelation and the end times. Well, in the last several weeks, we have been covering a very important topic, and we've been sharing with you several chapters and several videos on the rapture, and I call the rapture BS, and that's the Bible scam that has been taught concerning the rapture and the end times. So today I'm going to continue on with Matthew chapter 24. This will probably be a two-part series, so be prepared. We'll go to a second part later on, or I'm going to video the entire teaching at one setting, and I will break it up. And then someone says, why are you going to break it up? It's real simple. Most Christians, most people who watch videos have the attention span of a fruit fly, okay? And so I have to break it up in little pieces so people will listen and people will go to the next section. So we'll do that today. And for those of you who want to get the whole presentation, we'll have a specific link just on that. So let's get into it. Let me remind you that we meet every Sunday morning at ChristLifeCenter at 9775 Southwest 87th Avenue here in Miami, Florida, 33176. We meet at the Riviera Preparatory School Auditorium. Same location I've been teaching from for the last 40 years. You'll be blessed. Also want to encourage you to give, and you can give by using the QR code, or you can text give. Simply take your phone, text 73256, 73256. In the subject line, Christ Life Center, you'll be directed to a secure giving menu in which you will be able to give one time, multiple times. Regardless of whether you agree with the teaching today, that's immaterial. What is material is that I want to challenge you to think beyond, what you have understood, and think and understand exactly what the Bible teaches. Now, Matthew chapter 24, verse 1 through 3 is probably one of the most controversial chapters in the Bible. And you can interpret this through many lenses, each one given a different perspective and a different significance of fulfillment. But we're going to talk about how, in particular, Jesus was addressing the disciples of his generation that he was speaking to in specific relationship to the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem at 70 AD. So let's look at the scriptures. Matthew chapter 24, verse 1 through 3. And Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, See ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another, that shall not be thrown down. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? Now, it's important for you to understand that you need to read the entire Mount Olivet Discourse. That's what it's called in the Bible. That's Matthew chapter 21, 22, 23, and 24. These are 4 chapters that should be kept together, studied together in context, because it puts together the setting, the situation in which Jesus is teaching. And you cannot, as most people do, take Matthew 24 out of the context of its setting, which was on the Mount of Olives and at the temple in Jerusalem. Very specific. Now, we want to talk about a couple of things there, symbolisms that people have. They talks about the fig tree, and he curses the fig tree. And people say, what is that parable of the fig tree? Why did he curse the fig tree? Now, let me just start out very specifically. What Jesus is going to do in Matthew 21, 22, and 23, and 24 is he's going to begin to distinguish the end of the Judeo-legal law system and begin to bring in the understanding of God's grace and the kingdom of God on earth. All right? So the cursing of the fig tree is simple. He's giving the symbol that the fig tree representing Israel was cursed. It was going to die. But through that death, something else would emerge. And that's the Church of Jesus Christ. Now, we're going to look at this today, and I believe you're going to be blessed, okay? So, first of all, when shall these things be? When shall they be? And what shall these things be? When shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? So, you see here on the slide I'm showing you, Matthew 13:4, or Mark 13:4, and Luke 21, verse number 1, is a repetition of what these 3 questions are. So he's given you 3 specific questions. Now, these are important questions because it puts into context everything that people want to extrapolate and bring into the future when, in fact, it was relating to that particular generation. Now, let me give you a brief review, because that brief review is that we have in our lives been taught, and particularly if you grew up in a Pentecostal church such as I did, or a Baptist church or evangelical church, what you're going to find is they teach primarily a concept called dispensational theology. Now, we've covered that in the last 3 weeks. Dispensational theology was a theology of systematically breaking down the Bible into 7 components, 7 parts, 7 time periods in which supposedly God would talk and teach and impact each generation or each segment of time in a very specific way. Now, let me repeat this. I've said it in the past presentations, and I want to say it again. Nowhere, absolutely nowhere in church history. The early church fathers, the ante-Nicene fathers, the post-Nicene fathers, all the way up through John Calvin, all the way through Martin Luther, all of church history. No one, absolutely no one, wrote about a 7-year tribulation, about a pre-rapture tribulation, and a breaking up of this secret rapture. It's not there. This was introduced by John Darby based upon a vision that was given by Margaret MacDonald, and John Darby then integrated it into his teachings. This later precipitated into the writing of the Scofield Reference Bible in 1909. 1909. Now, if you have a Scofield Bible, you'll know that that it has its footnotes, it has its commentary, and this was a very significant change in people understanding the Bible, because now, for the first time, they had in one book a document that shows what John Darby, what Scofield were teaching and dispensational theology. Let me remind you, no one in church history until the 1830s, and in particularly 1909 when the Scofield Bible was released, no one in church history prior to that taught this theology. Now, there's a lot of events that took place. Obviously, 1830 is a very important date. 1855, this is when John Cumming announces that Russia will invade Israel, talking about the end time, 1855. This was based upon the dispensational teaching and the prophecy or the vision of Margaret MacDonald. Then you had in 1878, a very popular book by William Blackstone called Jesus is Coming. Now, let me remind you, this is important for you to understand. All of these books were written in the mid and late 1800s. Then in 1909, Scofield gives us the Scofield Reference Bible. So we have all of this thing taking place. Another significant date is 1917, the Balfour Declaration, where British begins to break up the Middle East and create a state of Israel in Palestine, So later on, you have 1970, where Hal Lindsey's Great Planet Earth began a huge impact, a ticking time clock, prophecy books, where everything was ticking down, tick, 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 Then in 1981, the rapture was being taught was going to come in 1981 because of the alignment of the planets and so forth. But then that was postponed till 1988. Now, it was 1988 was supposed to be when the Great Tribulation was to begin to happen. Why? Because in 1948, that was the establishment or the official establishment of the nation of Israel. And so the proponents of the dispensational theology and of the rapture theology says, Jesus says in Matthew chapter 24, this generation shall not pass away. A generation in biblical terms is 40 years. So when 1948 came, it became obvious to the dispensationalists and to those who wanted to believe in the rapture that 40 years coming would be the tribulation period, So 1948 to 1988, 40-year period. Now we have to back off of their 7 years because 7 years is the time period of the tribulation. Therefore, the rapture needed to take place in 1981. Now, you also have to understand 1988, obviously, the rapture was postponed because on May 14th, the 40th anniversary of the State of Israel was celebrated. And here we are now in 2025, and guess what? The rapture hasn't taken place. 1988, Edgar Weisenhout predicted that there would be the rapture in 1988, September, during the Jewish Rosh Hashanah. His book sold millions of copies from July to early September. I mean, I bought the book. I had the book. Actually, I didn't buy the book. The book was sent to me because I was a pastor on a mailing list, and he sent me a free copy. So we know that that didn't happen. In 1989, we had the fall of the Berlin Wall. In 1990, we had Iraq invading Kuwait. And the Dallas Seminary, Charles Dyer announces the revival of the prophesied Babylon. Babylon was arising once again. Now, of course, in 1991, we have the United States war going in, and we literally obliterate the Iraqi army. All of these days, okay? Then we finally had the year 2000, the change of the millennium, where people began to prophesy and predict that in this millennial change from 1999 to the year 2000, the rapture would take place. Well, we're now way past that, and we're now past where people are starting to believe that stuff, okay? So let's look at the contextual background of Matthew chapter 24. This is a part of the discourse of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, and it is a very important discourse because he's telling his disciples. He's right at the temple. You'll see that at the end of Matthew chapter 23. They're leaving the temple. The disciples look at the buildings around the temple and say, look at these beautiful structures, these beautiful edifices. And they were impressed. They were impressed, just like people today. They are impressed if a church has big buildings, if it has, a ministry program for everything under the sun. You got to have a children's program, a single mother's program, a widow's program. You've got to have a teen program. You got to have a youth program. You got to have a choir. You got to have all of these things where people become impressed with all of the functioning that's taking place. All of which I ask the question, none of the things that we do, most of the things that we do in the Bible were not in the Bible in the early church. And it's kind of interesting that the early church was able to evangelize the entire known world in very short period of time without all of the stuff that we have to think that we have to have today. But Christians, unfortunately, think that if there's a big building, lots of programs, daycare, all of this stuff is a reflection of a solid, strong, biblical church. I suggest to you, you need to look at the Bible as it identifies what a church is supposed to look like. You know, it reminds me much like the United States government and the United States Constitution. You know, the United States Constitution has the enumerated functions of the federal government. There's just a very few of them. And everything in the Constitution says that if it's not written in the Constitution, it reverts back to the states, and at the states, it reverts back to the individual. So what we have today in the United States government is we have this huge bureaucracy, thousands and thousands of agencies that are not constitutional, but they exist in this ever-expanding burgeoning of a U.S. government. Similar thing happens in the church. Rather than bringing the church back to the simplicity of presenting the gospel, teaching the word of God, we expand all of these ministries because we perceive there is a need, and the only way that need can be fulfilled is if the church provides a function, a ministry to be able to deal with it. I'm not being critical of it, but you need to understand, if you go back to the early church, there was a very few things that the church was involved in other than evangelism. Now, Matthew chapter 24 ties the first century Judea and the destruction of the temple by the Romans in 70 AD. Early Christians warned by Jesus' words that the interpreted of the fall of Jerusalem was the fulfillment of this particular prophecy. Now, so the disciples, these three questions. Tell us when these things shall be, what shall be the sign of thy coming, and of the end of the world. So here the disciples collapse three questions into one: the timing of the temple's destruction, the sign of the Lord's return, and the end of the age. Now, let me just tell you something. It's very important. Early church writers. Now, I've asked you this question. Would you not think that if Matthew chapter 24 was interpreted as it is being interpreted today as the key to be able to have what I call news clipping or headline prophecy predictions, there would be somebody from the first century somewhere to begin to write that. No, they answered the question of Matthew 24 very, very neatly in the concept of the destruction of the temple. Okay, let's break this down. Signs of the ends, okay? Matthew chapter 24, verse 4 through 14. False prophets. Now, this is where I think it's kind of interesting, because anytime you hear somebody, I mean, they want to peg anybody as a false prophet. This is a plan that is that's also used in politics. You don't discuss the topic. You basically just ignore the topic or the questions of others, and you simply say, no, that's not what it says, okay? I'm going to challenge you. Study to show yourself approved, a workman that needeth not be ashamed. Let's talk about false prophets. Jesus talks about the deception of false prophets. Well, there were false prophets throughout the early church. Simon Magus, the sorcerer, mentioned in Luke, by Luke in Acts chapter 8. There are more in Acts chapter 5 and Acts chapter 13. These are people who began to take upon the mantle that they themselves was the Messiah. This is why Matthew 24 says, here talk about false prophets, but don't believe them, don't go there, because there's only one Messiah, and I am it. Now here's another one that's quite interesting. Okay? Wars and rumors of wars. Now, we can turn to non-Christian sources, such as Tacticus, to determine that there were multiple wars going on in the first century in Israel and around the world. In fact, there were 3 civil wars going on in Jerusalem or in Israel at the same time, during which Jesus was teaching all the way up to 70 AD. Now, these wars, okay, we're going to look at them, but let's look at some of the other wars. The Roman conquest of Britain, 43 to 84 AD. Huge war, okay? These are wars. Now, here's the difference. You have the internet, you have the media, and every time there is a war, anytime there is a riot, anytime a building is burnt down, anytime someone's attacked, then you can go to X and you can go to Facebook and someone will make a post. And because of the preponderance of the ability to send out information quickly, then people construct the idea that this is what Jesus was talking about when he talked about wars and rumors of wars. We got wars in Israel. We got wars in Gaza. We got wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Lebanon, Libya. We got wars about to happen in Taiwan. We got wars in Ukraine. We got wars in Russia. We got wars breaking out throughout the nations of the world. And anytime there is this seemingly explosion of wars, that has to be a sign. Well, in the first century, there were multiple wars. There was the Roman Jewish War, 66 to 73 AD. This is where the Roman Empire was in a battle against the Jewish factions, the Zealots, the Pharisees, the Sadducees. They were battling and in war over taxation, religious suppression, occupation that spread to sporadic uprisings, including the Samaritan Rebellion in 36 AD, riots in Jerusalem, and a full-scale war that began in 66 AD, culminating in the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And this is documented by Josephus in the Jewish War. So what historians will tell you, that Jesus is telling them that in the generation he's talking to, he's speaking to a specific group of people, his disciples. He says, this generation shall not pass away until all these things be fulfilled. So there would be wars, rumors of wars, and indeed there were. There was the war of the Thracian Revolt, 46 AD. You had wars between Rome and Parthia, 58 to 63 AD. Wars all over the place, okay? And you can go to the history of that. You had sporadic wars and rebellions. You had the Batavian Revolution, or the revolt, the Roman Empire against Germans. I mean, these are things that are happening in that generation. Now, the key points to the Jewish war, according to Josephus, is that the factions within the Jewish society, the Zealots, which was a militant nationalist group that sought independence from Rome and opposed cooperation with the Roman authorities. Then you have the offshoot of the Zealots, known as assassins, targeting Jews that they thought were collaborators with Rome, the assassins. Okay? Then you had the Sadducees, the priestly elite who tended to cooperate with the Romans to maintain their power and their status quo with the temple. Then you had the Pharisees who were embattled, religious leaders who were focusing on the strict observance of the Jewish law, but they were divided on how they were going to deal with the Roman rule and occupation. And then you had the common people who were caught between these factions and often victimized by the fighting. Very similar to what we see today in our culture and our society. Now, in the early stages of the Jewish war, the Jewish factions turned against each other. And during the rebellion against Rome, they argued on how they were going to respond to the Roman rule and occupation. And so the violent power struggles erupted between the Zealots and the more moderate Jewish groups who wanted to negotiate and cooperate with Rome. Here's the important part. The temple, listen to me carefully, the temple was the central symbol of the Jewish faith, and it became the battleground for control. Now, I want you to put this in context. Jesus he's cursed the fig tree, and he said the fig tree is dead, which represented Jerusalem, or Israel rather, and the Jewish legal system of theology. And he's telling you a new system is going to emerge, which would be the church of the Lord Jesus Christ, his kingdom. So the central focus was who would control the temple. Now, Jesus understood this as a battle. That's why he said, not one stone will remain upon another. All of the temple will be totally destroyed. And in fact, in 70 A.D., during the Roman siege, the internal Jewish conflicts reached its peak. They were fighting each other, they were killing each other, and according to Jewish factions, Josephus rather, Jewish factions destroyed each other's supplies and weakened their collective ability to resist the Romans, and this infighting contributed significantly to their ultimate defeat and destruction. Wow, it couldn't be any more clear. Then you had Simon Bar and John Gischala, two rival leaders, okay? They were fighting, and the fighting was so intense in the city of Jerusalem. The leaders tried to control who would occupy and take the temple. The impact of that war, of them fighting in among themselves, it's the same thing we do today. We divide and conquer, divide into factions, divide and conquer. We divide in Christianity. We divide between denominations, and we divide. So we fight against each other rather than uniting each other to bring about the purposes of God's kingdom and to bring eternal life to those who need salvation. Literally thousands of Jews were killed, not only by the Romans, but by also the Jews during this civil conflict. Okay, that's the first part we're going to talk about. I'm going to break here, okay? And we're going to go into the second part.